your guys' response to the IDF report on the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh, but also on the situation with the Palestinian NGOs. So number one, on the IDF report yesterday, I'm a little confused as to what your actual response and what your actual position is. This is an American citizen who was killed. You have called for accountability, and yet there does not seem to be any accountability there. And the statement that came out yesterday in Ned's name mentions accountability, but are you satisfied that this is that the Israelis have done what they need to do in terms of this case?
So we continue to underscore the importance of accountability in this case, and we're going to continue to press our Israeli partners to closely review its policies and practices on rules of engagement and consider additional steps to mitigate the risk of civilian harm, protect journalists, and prevent similar tragedies in the future. Ultimately, that is a key goal for us, as the statement from Ned said yesterday, is to underscore that similar actions and similar occurrences don't happen in the future. And that's what we continue to reiterate with our Israeli partners.
Well, but do you think that accountability has been achieved?
So again, we continue to underscore the importance of accountability in this case, and we're continuing to press our Israeli partners on that.
Forgive me for not accepting that doesn't mean anything. I mean, I continue to underscore the fact that it's important that that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, but and which it does. But there is. Do you consider that? Do you believe that Israel has taken steps to hold whoever is responsible for her death accountable? And then, if I could, now just actually back up. What does accountability mean to this administration?
Look, Matt, so I'm not going to categorize that in one way or the other from here. That's for our Israeli partners to determine. What for us to do, and the role we're continuing to play, is pressing Israel to closely review its policies and practices to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again.
Okay, but that's not what accountability is, unless you guys have a different definition of it than the dictionary does. So what does accountability mean for this administration? An apology? We're sorry. It happened. Maybe it looks like it happened by accident. So, but it won't happen again. That's what accountability is, or is it something more?
We are continuing to press Israel to review its policies and practices, and that is what accountability.
But how does that? But that doesn't. Reviewing their practices and policies does not mean accountability for this woman's death, does it?
Look,
maybe it does in your view. I don't know. Tell me.
Our thoughts remain with the Abu Akleh family as they grieve this tremendous loss. Not only, as you all know, Shireen was a U.S. citizen and she was a fearless reporter. And part of our vision of accountability is ensuring that activities like this, that something like this does not happen again. And that's something that we continue to raise directly with Israel, that it closely review its policies and practices on the rules of engagement, to take additional steps to mitigate risk, to protect journalists, to protect civilian harm, and to ensure that similar tragedies don't happen in the future.
Okay, well, what is then the other part or other parts of accountability? From your perspective?
Matt, I think I've answered your questions a couple of times. I will just reiterate again.
I mean, you've said some stuff in response to my questions a couple of times. I don't think you've answered them. But let's move. I'll let someone else go on. I just want to move to the NGOs.
Sure.
So you had said that were looking for additional information to support the Israelis' allegation that. Support the Israelis' decision to close down these offices, and I'm wondering if you ever got that.
We continue to engage directly with our Israeli partners on that. We strongly believe that respect for human rights and the importance of strong civil society are critically important. and we've made clear to the Israeli government and the PA that independent civil society organizations in the West Bank must continue their important work. I don't have any updates on this beyond what Ned briefed on this a couple of weeks ago. We continue to seek additional information from our Israeli partners, but don't have an update beyond
So
that.
they never brought the information that they said that they were going to?
I just don't have any other updates on this.
That if you're referring back to what Ned said a couple of weeks ago, that was before the Israelis had brought this, what they said was going to be this information. They promised that they were going to bring you information. They haven't done that as far as you know?
We are in direct communication with the government of Israel, and we're continuing to seek additional information. Saeed.
Thank you for that. It's great to see you behind the podium. Welcome.
Thank you.
But let me press Matt's question a bit further. I mean, the Israelis obviously know who the soldier is, and they said basically they are not going to press any charges. There will be no accountability. I mean, that is the Israeli statement that you have supported. There will be no accountability. So how does that juxtapose with, you talk about the family, your thoughts are with them, all this good stuff. But how are they going to receive accountability or justice in this case?
Again, Saeed, we continue to press Israel directly and closely at the senior-most levels to review its policies and practices on this to ensure that something like this doesn't happen again in the future. That's something we're continuing to be really engaged on.
But you know what? It happened. It happened right after Shireen Abu Akleh. There were 2 journalists that have been killed. It happened time and again. There are 21 Palestinian journalists in Israeli prisons and so on. The Israelis are killing kids every day and teenagers and so on. So I don't know, when you say that we talk to them at the highest level, I mean, do they heed your call? Do they listen to you? Or they just pretend that you're not saying anything?
Saeed, I'm not going to read out every diplomatic engagement that we have, but I will mention again that we continue to press Israel to closely review its policies and practices on the rules of engagement, to take steps to mitigate risk, to take steps to protect journalists, to take steps to protect civilians, and prevent similar tragedies like this happening in the future. We, the United States, continue to support press freedoms and the protections of journalists in carrying out their work, and we call on democracies and all responsible actors to ensure that journalists can conduct the vital work that they do.
If this, excuse me, I have a couple more questions on the Palestinian issue, so we don't have to come back to it. So hypothetically, I mean, they could be listening to you and they will heed your, your warning to them not to do it again and so on. But in fact, they do it again. And hypothetically, if this had happened elsewhere, would your position be the same? If an American journalist was killed, let's say, somewhere else, in another democratic country, that the police gunned her down the street, let's say in India or elsewhere, would your position be the same, in your opinion?
Said, I'm not going to get into a back and forth on hypotheticals. In any situation, we continue to support press freedoms and the protection of all journalists. Mm-hmm. And in this situation, we again are pressing Israel to closely review its policies and practices, to address the rules of engagement, to take steps to mitigate risk, to take steps to protect journalists and civilians, and to ultimately ensure that something like this does not happen again.
I have a couple more questions. Let me ask you about the new rules that Israel is imposing on those who visit the West Bank and Palestinians or go to get married and so on. They are demanding, like, a time table on romance, if you wish, and so on. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, so I think you might have seen that Ambassador Nides spoke a little bit about this over the weekend, but to reiterate, since February, the State Department, including through our embassy in Jerusalem and the Office of Palestinian Affairs, have engaged directly with the Israeli government on these rules, and will continue to do so going forward. We continue to have serious concerns with the published protocols, particularly the role in determining whether individuals invited by Palestinian academic institutions are qualified to enter the West Bank, and the potential negative impact on family unity, as you mentioned. It's important to ensure that all of these regulations are developed in a way that's coordinated with key stakeholders, including the Palestinian Authority, and we fully expect the government of Israel to make necessary adjustments to ensure transparency as well as the fair and equal treatment of all U.S. citizens and other foreign nationals traveling to the West Bank.
So if myself or my brothers or members of my family and so on that hold an American citizenship go back, and they are, or they get interrogated almost on issues of land ownership. Well, who are they visiting? Why are they there? Where will they be staying, and so on? Do they have a recourse? Could they come to you and say, "This has happened to me. I demand accountability"?
Saeed, we are continuing to engage with Israel on these pilot procedures that were published this weekend that, as you said, impact the entry, study, and work or residence of potentially thousands of people in the West Bank. We understand that Israel plans for them to go into effect on October 20th. We note that there are some improvements in some of these regulations from the original draft in February, but we remain concerned about potential adverse impact for these procedures and how they could impact Palestinian civil society, how it could impact tourism, impact family unity, investment, and other healthcare and academic institutions.
Honestly, Vedant, the problem is with the pilot program. You should look into that.
Definitely.